First of all, welcome to everybody that is visiting with us again. Thank you for joining us. For those of you online, we are grateful that you're here. We are a church that is here to help people find and to follow Jesus. And we do that in different ways. Today, we're here to sing together in participatory worship, where we're singing hymns to God. We love God, so we worship Him together as a group, but we also worship Him throughout the week. And we do that by connecting and getting together in groups for coffee, for connection throughout the week, hospitality. We do that as well through being self-feeders. And I want to really encourage you, as Bruce mentioned in his prayer about our journey through the New Testament. If you haven't started yet, you are not far behind at all. We're only going through a chapter a day, so I think we're on Matthew chapter 6 right now. But please join us for that if you can. There is a way that you can do this through a Bible app on YouVersion, which is the Bible Project New Testament in 1 year, and you can start that plan. That comes with videos and things like that will really help as well. There's also a speaker icon, and I shared that last week. So if you don't like to read, you can press the speaker icon, and it'll actually read to you. So I really encourage you to do that with us, because as we meet together within groups and for coffee, we can talk about what we're learning together. So I really encourage everyone, if you can, join us in this. We're starting a new series today called The Unexpected Jesus, and today is I Chose You. And for many of you who have kids, they started school within the last week. For many of you who went to school, you remember this day. This was your first day of school, and maybe many of you felt like that. This here is this young man's first day of kindergarten. He's 6 years old. His teacher's name is Mrs. Angela. His favorite color is blue. He loves to swim. His favorite food is cereal. I have to laugh at Norma. She had Frosted Flakes for dinner the other night. That was her favorite cereal, and for dinner. I want to be a cow hauler. I didn't even know what that was. I had to look that up, but just transports cows. But he's not too happy to be at school. But today, I want to invite you to go to school with me. We're going to go back to Jewish school, where maybe Jesus would have been when he was just a young boy this age, 6 years old. So we're going to go to Jewish school together. I believe if we do this, it'll help us understand why Jesus said some of the things he said, why he did some of the things he did, and it's going to help us understand why he chose those who he chose. So humor me, if you will, if we just kind of go to Jewish school together. This is the Talmud, which is the Jewish book that contains their history. It contains Jewish religion. It contains their laws and their beliefs. But this is what it says in the Talmud. Under the age of 6, we do not receive a child as a pupil. From 6 upwards, accept him and stuff him with Torah like an ox. These people were immersed in the scriptures. So from 6 to 10 was Bet Sefer. It's kind of from kindergarten to grade 5 or so, but from the ages of 6 to 10, they would go to Bet Sefer, which was a Jewish school that was in a synagogue, most likely during Jesus' time, and they would memorize the Torah, and the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. They would memorize it. That was their education. So you talk about Deuteronomy chapter 6 and that verse we read last week where they were totally immersed in it. Talk about when you get up, when you lie down, when you walk along the road. They were immersed in the Torah. They would have begun memorizing the Torah at this young age. Just remember, they don't have Bibles. They have scrolls. Those scrolls were expensive. They were in the synagogue. You would go to a synagogue to have those scrolls read to you. They'd have a Torah closet where those scrolls were. Scrolls would be shared amongst synagogues because you may not have all the scrolls. So you would share them, and you would have a synagogue teacher teaching you the Torah. So you couldn't just take a scroll home to memorize it. It's while you were there, you were completely memorizing the scripture for those from ages 6 to 10. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Memorized by age 10. If you're like me, we have a hard enough time getting through Leviticus. Can you imagine memorizing the first 5 books of the Bible? Now, to us, we may think that's impossible, but I want to share a story with you for a second. The other night, my wife and I got to go on a date about a week and a half ago. We don't go out, just the two of us on a date very often. Shame on me. But this was all romance. I mean, we went to Harlech Park, and they had the symphony happening at Harlech Park underneath the tent. We didn't know that. We just went there to go for a walk, but it was packed. And we got a park bench really close where we could hear the music. Didn't pay a thing. But man, we sure paid attention to each other. And we fell in love again, just listening to music and talking. It was a great night. My wife loves those kind of nights where it's just us. We're just listening to something different. God made everything happen perfectly. We're on our way home. Not a word of a lie. Honeymoon Suite, the band, comes on with a song. And it's called What Does It Take? And she turns up the radio like she never usually does. And she turns to me and she starts singing. She's going to kill me. She starts singing every single word to me from that song, What Does It Take? Now, that song came out in 1985. She was 14 years old. She knows every single word. It blew my mind. I just couldn't believe that she could remember every single word. I love her. She sings great. When the music's loud, it was awesome. The Jewish students, think about this. It's how they learned. It was memorization. They just continued to have it soak in their minds like sponges. But the best of the best students would continue in their education after Bet Sefer. So if you memorized all the first 5 books of the Bible, and someone thought, you know what, it's worth you continuing in your education, stick with it a little bit longer, you would go to Bet Talmud. And Bet Talmud was for the ages between 10 to 14. Do you know what they'd do? They'd memorize all the rest of the Old Testament from Genesis to Malachi would be memorized by the age 10. I know, we just boggles our mind, but by the age 10, they'd have all these memorized. And you can do research on this. You can find this. Ray Vanderland has lots of different things about this time period. You can go and look up under Jewish schooling and things like that. It still happens today. If you went this far, you're going to memorize the rest of the Hebrew Scriptures. You would also begin to understand, and this is really important, you'd begin to understand the way you learn. And you learn by questions and answers. This is a different type of learning than we learn in our Western culture. Our Western culture is, here's a test, 2 plus 2. What is it? 4. Right. Then we're on to the next question. But if you were under a Jewish school system, the way you would answer it is not by giving the answer. You would ask another question. So what's 2 plus 2? You would say something, what is 16 divided by 4? Oh, so all of a sudden now your teacher knows you know the answer, but you're even expanding that. And in Scripture, that's called remez. It's going deeper. They would give you a passage, and they would expect you to know what the context is, what comes before it, and what comes after it, and you would do it in terms of questions and answers. Now, with that in mind, look at this passage. We don't know a lot about Jesus as a little boy, but I love this. We do know when he was 12 years old, that was a special time in a little Jewish boy's life, because it's like today we have, maybe heard the word bar mitzvah, but this was a time when Jesus would have been taken to the temple with his parents. Listen to this. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. It's pretty responsible parents. Maybe some of you left your kids at church before, if that ever happened to you. It happened to me. But, I mean, come on, you're walking away from your kid. They began looking for him amongst their relatives and friends. And when they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts. Now, this is important because synagogues were different than temples. Synagogues were more local to where you lived. The temple was always back in Jerusalem. So they would have set these synagogues up for learning, for going in. And Jesus went to these synagogues in his ministry. This is where he taught the word. After 3 days, they found him in the temple court, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Why? Because that's what you do. And everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. They could not believe how smart this Jesus was at such a young age. But that puts him in the age of Talmud, where he would have been memorizing the whole Old Testament. This is where Jesus was in that process. But it's important to note as well, and this is huge, the rabbi during that time all had different ways of interpreting the text. So let me give you an example. So if you wanted to discuss the Sabbath with a rabbi, the rabbi would have this idea of the Sabbath, and he would say, listen, the Sabbath, the rules are this, and this, not that, and that. And that would be what the rabbi believed. And there might be another rabbi that believed something a little different in the way he interpreted the text. And he would come and say, yeah, okay, I see you're this, and this, but I think it's that, and that. And there would be these question and answers and debates on the scripture all the time. And the way a rabbi, and this is huge, the way a rabbi interpreted the scriptures and put his rules upon those texts was called his yoke. His yoke. Now, for many of us, all of a sudden our minds go to, yoke. Maybe it reminds you of this scripture that Jesus shares in Matthew chapter 11. Come to me, now he's a rabbi at this time, going around, he's a teacher and he's having disciples follow him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke, in other words, my interpretation of the scriptures, and the way that I live them out, which is a lot more in the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Man, light bulbs just went off for me when I understand it this way. I'm trying to think, okay, how do you walk along in a yoke with an ox? And no, it's with Jesus, and you can think about it that way, but the yoke is the way that he would interpret the scriptures. Remember, he says, I haven't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. It was the way he was going to live out the scriptures. So, as we go on, what does this mean? It's Jesus wants us to take his yoke upon us. Jesus doesn't have an endless set of rules and regulations. Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you. But what happens at the end of Talmud? So now you have finished your education. As you've gotten as far under the synagogue education system. Now, if you were the best of the best of the best, you would go and find a rabbi who you could serve under. And they would give you like an application process. And this was called the Bet Midrash. Between the ages of 14 and 30, you had to go to apply to a rabbi. And you would present to this rabbi and ask if you could become his talmid, or his disciple. This was more than just a student. This was actually someone who was going to become just like his rabbi. You were going to learn everything you could about your rabbi. And so this rabbi, wanting to make sure that you're the best of the best of the best, what they would do is they would start to question you. And this rabbi had a yoke. And this yoke that he carried, he wanted you to continue on, to share his interpretation of the text and send it out to others and make disciples. And so this rabbi would begin to grill you, this young applicant, to see if he's worthy. And so he would ask a question. He would say, tell me about this passage in Isaiah. And he'd quote a certain passage. But he's not looking for the rest of the passage. He's looking for what comes before it, what comes after it. Do you understand this rabbi well enough that you know what he believes about that teaching? And so you would quote back to him a certain passage. Why? Because you have it memorized and you know the context. So if your response would be a text from above or below it, that would let him know that you know what he's asking. We do this with movies. We do this with movies sometimes. We find ourselves in a situation that reminds us of certain scenes from a movie, and we quote the line knowing that you're going to understand. Let's pretend you're in a car dealership with your spouse and you're looking for your next car. And the salesman is there, and of course you're nervous to be in front of a car salesman, but he wants to present you an offer. He says, let me go see my manager, and I'm going to see what best numbers I can come up with. And you turn over to your wife and he's going to make us an offer we can't refuse. Right away, oh, that's funny, Godfather. I know what you're talking about. Or you're in this scary part of town, you've been driving, and it's like, okay, we've turned at the wrong street. This is not where we need to be. And you turn to your wife and say, Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. You know exactly what your spouse is talking about. Or maybe you're camping with a few friends. It's cold, it's been raining, you're in a tent. And, you're trying to stay warm. Someone rolls over and hits the other person, and someone says, those aren't pillows. You'd know exactly what you're talking about. It's from planes, trains, and automobiles. But everyone would start laughing. Why? Because you understand the context of the movie, and it brings back a certain memory. Jesus would do this when he was talking to the religious leaders. That's why so many times we can't figure out why did they get so mad at him. But he would take a certain passage, say it, but they knew what was all around it. They knew what came next. And then they realized he's calling out our hypocrisy. And they'd want to take him and push him over the edge. And he'd usually escape. But Jesus wasn't afraid to share passages with them and to hold them accountable. The text was so deep inside these Jewish students that it was in their bones, that they could converse and have conversations based on passages. And this is the way they would converse. So the rabbi wants to know, are you the best of the best of the best? And if you are, your rabbi would say, you have what it takes. Come, follow me. And you know what you'd do? When your rabbi says, come, follow me, you would leave your family. You would leave your village. You would leave your local synagogue. You would leave everything to follow this rabbi. I want you to be thinking that as we go into this next few passages. Let me put it this way. You would give your life for this rabbi. You'd be following him so closely. There's a quote that says, from the Mishnah sage, that says, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Walking so closely to your rabbi that the dust from his sandals that comes up covers you. That's how closely you're going to follow this rabbi. This is what it means to be a disciple. This is what it means to be just like him. And if the rabbi, after he interviews you, thinks that you don't have what it takes, he would say something like this. He would say, go back to your village. Go get married. Have children, and pray that they have what it takes to become rabbis. And these people would go back to their family business. They would go back to the family trade, and they would just go back and not anymore pursue trying to become a student of a rabbi. Now, with this in mind, these scriptures are really important for us. Because this passage, let's see if it speaks something different to you as we go through it. Matthew 4:18. We just read this if you're following along in the New Testament. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he's now a rabbi. He saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. So my question for you is, why were they fishermen? because they sure weren't good enough to be a Talmudim and have a rabbi to follow. They went to the family business or their family trade. They were fishermen. But Jesus says this, "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." Now, the next verse challenged me for many years because I'm trying to think, is Jesus calling me and just telling me to leave everything to follow him? Well, this is what Peter does. And Andrew, at once, they left their nets and followed him. But in the context of typically these men were passed by from any further education. But here's a rabbi walking by on the Sea of Galilee, and he sees them and he says, "Come, follow me." And he's going to give them a purpose. It's not that it's wrong to fish. It's, I want to give you a greater purpose. You're going to fish for men. But what Jesus is really saying is, I believe in you. You've got what it takes. And I have a greater purpose for you. A little later, going on from there, he saw two brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his father John. They were in the boat with their father Zebedee preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. And I used to think, are you kidding? What's the father thinking? Boys, where are you going now? Come back. Oh, here they go again. So irresponsible. Where are they? Now think of Mr. Zebedee going home to Mrs. Zebedee. Oh, where's the boys? They're not with us. They're not here. They're not coming home tonight. What do you mean? You'll never believe this. You'll never believe this. There was a rabbi who thought our boys were good enough. Our boys. The next day, Mr. Zebedee would be down by the docks, walking around, everyone asking, "Where's your boys today? Sleeping in again, I guess." No, because you'll never believe it. My boys were considered worthy enough, and a rabbi chose my boys. So why drop your nets? Because your rabbi thinks you're good enough. A rabbi thinks that you can become just like him. And it gets better. Let's end it with this. It says immediately after this, now this is in Matthew 14. Jesus had just fed the 5,000. The disciples that are following Jesus at this time just witnessed an amazing miracle. And remember, they're trying to become just like their rabbi in everything. That's why Jesus says, "What do you have?" Remember? And they only had a few small fish and bread. And they fed 5,000 people. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. And after sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Now, just the context that these disciples would have been in this time of history is water always had to do with the abyss. The lake had to do with the abyss. It was a scary thing to be out on the waters, and especially when this happens. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble, far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. And when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. And they cried out, "It's a ghost." But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I am here." And if you dig into that portion of Scripture right there, "take courage, I am here," and you look to the Greek, it says, the I am is here. In other words, God with us. The I am, the one that met Moses in the burning bush. The I am is here. And I love this because this shows how Peter wants to become just like his rabbi. Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it is really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." And Jesus does something unexpected. Jesus says, "Yes, So Peter went over the side of the boat, and he walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he saw the strong winds and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. I just want to go back to this part for 1 second. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water. There was a moment that Peter was just like his rabbi. But when he saw the strong winds, he was terrified, and he began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me? Why did you doubt me?" I always taught that Peter lost faith in Jesus during this time. And that's true. But I'm going to ask you a question. Is Jesus sinking? He's not sinking. Jesus is not sinking. Peter lost faith in himself, that he could become just like his rabbi. I have come to understand that I need to have faith in Jesus, and that is true. We need to have faith in Jesus. But have you ever thought of it this way? Apparently, Jesus has faith in you, that you can become just like him. He says to Peter, "I wouldn't have called you out on the water if I didn't have faith that you could do it." Jesus has faith that we can be just like him. And our battle is always going to be, do I have what it takes? Do I have what it takes? We're going to doubt ourselves so many times. But the beauty of us in a relationship with Jesus is that we get his Spirit, which is the same Spirit that raises Christ from the dead. He has faith that we can do it, and he's given us everything to be just like him. But are we going to fail? Yeah. Are we going to sink? Yeah. But he's always there, reaching down to us to pull us back up. Why? Because he has faith in us that we can become just like him. But you know what the implications of this is? This has so many implications to our community, because think about what this means to our neighborhood. I have great friends here today, Elkie and Dave, and I was just so honored. Yesterday we went for a walk around my neighborhood, and my friend Dave just said, "Hey, I just want to pray for your neighborhood." And we took the dog and walked around and just prayed for our neighbors. I am expectantly waiting for something to happen. I'm going to meet my neighbor somewhere along the way that I didn't know before. Something's going to happen. Why? Because we prayed for it. And Jesus says, pray for anything, and my Father will give it to you if it fits within his will. And I want badly for our neighborhood to come to a relationship with Christ. And I thank him for that. It's so good to be able to pray with one another, but praying for our neighbors. There are people that don't know and believe in a kingdom that can last forever. They need to know Jesus, and that there's a rabbi out there that is saying, "Come and follow me," because Jesus has great faith in his followers, and he trusts that we can become just like him.